What's up, guys? So, within this interview, we have returning guest Alex Merkin, who directed the latest film that was released on October 6th of 2018 for sci-fi 31 Days of Halloween, No Escape Room. Maybe within this film, you'll think twice about visiting an escape room because you may never know if you'll ever be seen again. How's it going, everybody? This is a new interview of 2019 already. We are fortunate enough to already have 3 this year. Isn't that shocking? And it's already just the beginning of 2019. Tonight is going to be a little bit different. I am Paul Dolsky. For those that know my fiance, Tessa Baker, she is here. Unfortunately, she's recovering from a cold. And tonight, as we're recording this interview, actually, with our special returning guest, which I will stay in a second, is, we got 3 episodes recorded today. So she wanted to try to hold on to her voice, especially from the recovering from the nasty flu. And, it's that time of year where it's always going to be coming around somewhere. But back on track, we got returning guest, as you may have heard him before from last year for his film House of the Witch. Here is none other than Alex Merkin. Hello, Alex. Welcome back.
Hey, thank you for having me back. I appreciate it.
You're, like I said, you're always welcome back, Alex. I like I like the bond and chattiness that we had last time. So I figured, hey, why not, right? And plus, you had a nice movie that came out last year in October that premiered on Sci-Fi, which was called No Escape Room, which is what we're going to be talking tonight.
That's right. Well, thank you. Yeah, no, I enjoyed being here last time, and I'm happy to be back again. That's right. No Escape Room, not to be confused with Escape Room, which if people are not familiar with No Escape Room, maybe they might think that it's a movie that was put out quickly to match the bigger budget Escape Room, but actually we were out there first. So I had never heard of Escape Room until well after the movie came out, and I was sitting in a theater, and I was very surprised to see some similarities, but not accusing anybody of anything. just was surprised to see it so quickly. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah, no, it's exactly like what you said. Perfect. That was like perfect to explain, because I was actually going to say, like, this is not the Escape Room that is in theaters as we speak. So completely different. I'm trying to remember. That came out October 7th, somewhere around
I
that
think October 7th. I think you're right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So yeah, we premiered. We were a part of the Sci-Fi 31 Days of Halloween. I think we kicked off the whole month. So that was fun. Yeah. Second time we've had a nice premiere during that slot. So.
Was the first one House of the Witch?
Yeah, House of the Witch premiered the year before on 31 Days of Halloween. So that was great. They both have a little, they both have a little theatrical thing, and then they after that they premiered it to the broader public, through Sci-Fi. So.
Oh, that's cool.
That's cool. Great. Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds great. And speaking of greatness, let's just take a minute and appreciate this No Escape Room that we're going to be talking about with a small synopsis, which is when an escape room attraction turned from a fun bonding activity to a dangerous paranormal experience, a father and daughter must flee from an angry spirit. So yeah, and it looks like it was released on October 6th, actually. So I was a day off. Whatever, it happened.
Okay. Close enough. Close enough.
Yeah, close enough. But so Alex, for the returning of maybe somebody that hasn't really heard the House of the Witch episode with you, just if you wouldn't mind again just explaining just a small origin story of who you are.
Sure. Thanks. Well, I've been making movies for a little while now. I've done eight feature films. I started off with I made a movie over at Universal for my first feature that starred Brittany Murphy and Mike Vogel and Danny Pino, called Across the Hall. It was sort of a psychological thriller, kind of Hitchcockian style, psychological thriller set in a hotel about a man who tracks his fiancée to the hotel and then stakes out the room across the hall from her, and then calls his best friend to basically, he gets a gun and a bottle of booze, and he's in there drinking, and then he's about to go do something crazy and calls his best friend, who's sort of his lifeline, who's his best friend's trying to talk him off the ledge. And it's a fun little, tight little thriller that actually started off as a short film that we made with Adrian Grenier from Entourage. And that movie, when it came out in, I think, 2005, we won something like 50 awards and did really well. And then sort of spawned my whole sort of film career. So yeah, I've had the good fortune of since then working steadily and making movies every year. So I'm very lucky to do it.
Well, that's amazing, Alex, and all the more reason to just say keep up the good work of what you're doing already. So, yeah.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you're very welcome. And so let's kick it off, Alex, with the first question here, which for No Escape Room, which is, so how did you and Neil think of No Escape Room, and what inspired you guys to create the Escape Room film?
Yeah, actually, I can't take any credit for that. Neil had some partners. Neil and his partners over at the company Mar Vista, they were sort of throwing around some ideas to think, because I told you about Neil actually last time that we spoke, and he's somebody who I really like to collaborate with. He's a great producer. He's an executive over at Mar Vista, and he's just super talented, super creative, super on top of things. He's the kind of producer you want in your corner. So we've had a great experience working together, and we have other films on the horizon that we're going to be doing together. But so he called me up and basically started pitching some of the idea of it. Essentially, some of the elements of it. It's an escape room. It's a father-daughter movie. It wasn't a lot of detail to it yet. I had to develop it with my writing partner Jesse, and then Jesse also developing it with some of the guys over there to kind of get the whole script in order. But it was at first I wasn't, I was very familiar with escape rooms, but wasn't quite sure what kind of movie this was going to be. And then as we started to, get into the development process, I got really excited about the prospect of some of the ideas that we got to explore in it. So it really came about with those guys over there. There's a guy named David Massey, and I believe the other guy's name was Nick. I actually don't think I've ever met Nick, but they're all sort of a team over there with Neil, and they had already brought the idea to me and said, "What do you think? Can we go down this path?" And after talking to Jesse and getting excited about some of these ideas, Jesse Middlestat is the writer of the film. He actually wrote Across the Hall that was my first feature, and he's written other films. Like we did a movie called Altitude from Lionsgate that came out in theaters a couple of years ago. So I always like working with Jesse, and we collaborate really well together, and we just started getting really excited about some of the ideas And I know one of the biggest elements that we wanted to think about and consider in it was just sort of whether or not this was a game, whether or not, like it is really extreme parlor tricks that are, that these guys are, the experience that these characters are going through, or is there something paranormal and more extreme happening, something bigger happening. And it was sort of fun to play with that.
Yeah, that's quite a story right there. And it's kind of cool that you think of like the paranormal aspect, because usually when you think of like an escape room, this is to my knowledge, because I have never tried one yet, but I mean, I don't really think you would ever think it would be a dangerous thing unless it's one of those horror type theme ones, I guess. But if you're thinking of going in there just to help out each other, kind of like all these characters did, but then they ended up, having something completely different going on. And yeah, it's just kind of cool.
And that was one of the things, originally we weren't sure, like, at first there were sort of different ideas kind of jumping around, like, is it going to be a movie like Cube? Is it going to be more high tech? There's always going to be sort of a sci-fi element to it in a way that wasn't just pure horror. There's always going to be some element of it that was, slightly, that had some elements of science fiction in it and psychological thriller in it. Is it a movie like The Game where you don't know if this is just super extreme, because there's all these super extreme horror experiences out now. That was one of the things we did a lot of research on. For example, I'm sure you're probably familiar with things like McKinney Manor and, things like, what's the other one? I can't think of the other name right now, but Blackout. Blackout's another one. And they're like these extreme horror experiences that you go into and the people can like the McKinney Manor one is super extreme. I mean, that's one where it's practically torture. And people, it's if you're not familiar with it, you might just want to look it up and see how kind of crazy some of this stuff is. But Blackout's an experience where, like, they can, there's elements of like these guys touching you and throwing you around, and I heard or read reports of waterboarding and all the super extreme stuff that's like, it's, for me, I'm not that into it, but it's, again, the idea of like how extreme can some of these horror experiences be? Is this a super extreme horror experience, or is this like, or is it something else? And then we started to think about the idea of this house itself kind of being, we were very sort of early on came to the conclusion that we didn't really want to be this high tech, modern sort of, thing going on, which would be a lot more similar to what you might see in Escape Room, the movie that's out now. But we wanted to do something that felt like it had more history to it in the space itself. And so Jesse and I started thinking about the idea that this house, has this history where, it was built around the turn of the century, but there's all this sort of clockwork and mythology behind it, where you have this sort of deranged, an obsessive scientist, who's obsessed with trying to create. It's almost like the house itself that he's built is like a giant three-dimensional conductor towards the paranormal. It's almost like a giant living Ouija board in a way, where you can walk through and contact in different ways that other, cultures and experiment with the idea of reaching across to the other side. So that was, sort of the idea of like, is that just is what these guys experiences are, is their experience that this is just the backstory to some extreme game, and it's just like it's all BS, or is there actually some truth to what they're being told? And so that's what we liked playing with, and it became really fun to kind of see each room as like a different element of how to reach across and contact the other side and interact with, and sort of like this giant antenna and this weird thing, the space that you're playing with things and powers that you're not really, that's pretty dangerous to be playing with. And are these guys like in like being treated like, you know, rats in some sick experiment where they're being used to conduct these experiments, trying to reach out to the other side. So, or is it all a game? So that was the fun. That was the fun sort of thinking it up and where we could go into, you know, some of the ideas of what that would mean, and explore some more primitive ideas of spiritualism and you know, like the ayahuasca and or, you know, other sort of radio devices and things that again, but the idea, like the house itself has this is sort of this giant machine, and is sort of this with this clockwork behind it, and it's constantly transforming and changing, and all with the purpose of amplifying that spiritual, you know, connection. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and in short term too, it's almost saying like the house, as you were saying, the house is like its own Ouija board. You could also say that. So
Right.
the house is like coming alive, like it is alive, and
right. Like everything in the house, all the devices are meant for the other side to be able to reach back. So like you have all these machines and devices so that they can also, once you crossed over and once you're dead, you can reach back and communicate, you know, and you know what I'm saying? So that's kind of this cool space that you enter into. And that sort of accounts for, when you watch the movie, there's a lot of psychological things that happen that are a little like, you know, we play with this idea of like looping and echoes of, you might see yourself, or you might see some element of yourself, or be interacting with yourself at a later date or an earlier time, and having these sort of like time looping and echoes that go on throughout the movie. So, and again, whether or not that's like, is that from this crazy tea that they drank in the beginning that's just sort of hallucinogenic, or is there really some other stuff happening, you know? And that was the fun, getting to play with that.
Yeah, I would say so. So we noticed that at the beginning of the movie too, we get the first two characters, which are Michael and Karen, father and daughter, and we noticed like their relationship with each other isn't really like the strongest. It's almost as if the daughter is more connected to her mother than the father, which is completely normal. I mean, I'll throw it out there too. Like when my mother and father were together before the big divorce that they had that separated my family, you know, I was always with my dad, so I connected better with him. And just like my sister connected better with my mother. So when you know, when the divorce happened, it's almost like a bomb that went off. So my thought, and I mean, I look back at it now and I think to myself, wow, maybe if I was a little bit older to understand what was really going on, I would maybe understand it better than like I do today. But back when it first happened, I remember looking at my mother pretty much, you know, as this is your fault. Like we're not together as a family anymore because of you, not realizing that it was really my dad who was in need of help and stuff like that. So I guess with this question that I'm trying to figure out too, to understand better, is can you give us any more of a backstory of the relationship between Michael and Karen?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm really glad you picked up on that, because that, you know, we did want to really explore some of the, you know, more complex aspects of this relationship, which is that that family is divorced. Karen is essentially in a space where she's starting to grow, and she only gets to see her father, you know, one week out of the year, or for one weekend, and so like that's the extent of his time with her. He says that you know, earlier on in the diner there, and you know, there's some elements of her starting to grow and come into her own and find her own voice, and he's still sort of treating her like a little girl that he remembers her being, and there are elements also of her blaming him very specifically for the divorce. And that's actually something that does come up later on. There is sort of this idea and suggestion in the film that Michael himself had a bit of a weakness, and you might notice it in the scene when we call it the lady in the water scene, but it's just this idea of like that's what sort of gets manifested there. Spoilers, I guess, but what gets manifested there is sort of this manifestation of a weakness of his, which is this sort of female siren calling to him, which again is part of the story of the house itself, but is something that would tempt him and would sort of hypnotize him. But that's all very subtle, and it's not something that really is ever. We never wanted to outright state anything like that. Okay, he cheated, and they, or something like that. That's not really where we wanted to go with it, other than to suggest that there's some reason for, or possibly some reason why Karen blames, Michael for the divorce. But there's also that element of just, as a teenage girl, 16, 17, getting into that age range, wants to start, forming her own identity and figuring out who she is, and pulling away from her father more, and not wanting to be, treated like a child, and not wanting to be doing, like, kind of resenting that she has to go on this, weekend excursion with dad. Originally they were going to go ride horses, which she wasn't, she used to be into, she's not really into anymore. And that was closed down. She's annoyed at her father. He doesn't really keep up with, it's like in the conversation in the car about, her homework, and there was actually some conversation that we cut out of the film earlier on when they're in the diner where, he had tried to order her some like sandwich with meat on it, and she's been vegetarian for the last couple months or past year, and he has no clue about it, and just all these things where he just can't keep up with the fact that she's
changing.
Changing, and
yeah.
and she resents that, and she resents that he sees the old her, the younger her, the person she isn't anymore, and she resents the fact that when you live with the other parent, there's all that opportunity for that, for blaming the one that's not there anymore. And he, on his side, feels so much guilt, and he's trying so hard, and he's so insecure about his relationship with her. And that whole thing that's going on with the necklace in the film is really just this idea that, yeah, she's bitter, she's upset, she's angry, but she does love him, and his insecurities they're not, he doesn't need to try so hard. He doesn't need to fight so hard against all what's happening. He can be much more secure in the fact that at the end of the day, that's why you see her in private, and why he gets that look of her at the very end of the film. Again, spoilers, but at the very end of the film, when he gets that look at her actually putting on this necklace that he thought she doesn't wear anymore, and that he had given to her, but it was really, that's her way of staying connected with him privately. She doesn't want him to know that she loves him. She's angry. She doesn't, outwardly, she doesn't want him to know, but on the inside, she also feels guilty. She loves him, but she can't help feeling angry, and she can't help being mean at times because she is angry. And it's sort of one of those inevitable things that just kind of suck when, families start to split up, and when they start to fight, and they start to, people start to, there's a place to put your anger, and it might be your father when he's the one that's not around, or vice versa. And, that's just one of those inevitable things, that we wanted to explore. So I'm really, I'm happy you caught that though. And that's great.
Well, yeah, I mean, just like I was mentioning about my family, I've seen so much things like when I was younger where, it boggled my brain that, it's almost like one of those things like I was living a horror story at one point where it's just like, like, I don't really say this too much, but I remember when this nasty fight of my family broke out, and I'm just standing there watching this all go down. And one of the things I will never forget about this fight is when my mother was trying to call 911 because of my dad. He snapped. He completely lost it. And while my mother was even on the phone, he took the cord, the wired telephone. I know we're talking back in the day, so I'm probably ancient dinosaur here because all we see nowadays is wireless stuff. But anyway, he took the phone cord and wrapped it around my mother's throat, pretty much choking her with the phone cord. And then at that point in time,
Wow.
I'm just standing there like, what the hell? Like, I'm frozen. Like, I don't even know what to do. Like, and then my sister, who isn't frozen, go to the telephone and start talking to the operator. But this whole time, I'm just frozen because, I'm just like absorbing, like, wow, like, what is going on? Like, why is my family
Wow.
falling apart? I'm that young. I don't understand what's going on. And stuff like that. But yeah, I noticed that kind of quick because Karen reminded me of my old self when like I'd be in the car or something with my mom just by myself, and I would be, or my mom would try to talk to me about something, and I'd be doing the same thing that Karen's doing, just like ignoring her and just like, yeah, whatever, and everything
Right.
else. And
Right.
so, that part kind of hit me a little bit because it's just like, wow, like this, like whoever wrote this part understands what a separation is and what it can do to a kid. And,
Right.
it's sad because before my father passed away in 2003, it was really sad because he was finally getting his, I guess for lack of phrasing here, but he was finally getting his head in order again. I mean, we're
Mm-hmm.
talking about a guy who served Vietnam, who came back, and everybody knows that how the soldiers were treated. They were pretty much treated like shit and everything else.
Totally.
And then on top of that, you got my dad who fought cancer and won it, but the cancer ended up eating half of my dad's brain. And
Ugh.
like
Ugh.
those
Yeah.
things can just make anybody snap. And I mean, I remember my own mother telling me, like, she remembered waking up during the night and having my father over her with a loaded gun aiming at my mom's head. Why he never
Wow.
pulled the trigger, I
Wow.
don't know. So yeah, I
Wow.
mean, that's why
Yeah.
that specific scene catches my attention.
Well, I appreciate you sharing the story, and I'm sorry, obviously about your loss
I
and
appreciate that.
all of that. That's really heavy, and honestly, it's not at all happy that you've gone through that experience, but I'm happy to hear that you connect with the project in that way, and that's it means a lot to me that it feels sincere and that it feels honest, because that's what we always want to do. I mean, you have to, with any horror film, with any film in general, it's like if the material itself doesn't resonate with you on some other level, if you can't connect to these characters and their experiences
Exactly.
and sort of feel like you can go through this with them, then it's impossible to watch the movie and enjoy the experience, because you never feel tension. You don't care if somebody dies if you don't connect with them, if you don't want them to live on some level. So that's
Well, exactly. I mean, if you cannot connect to a character or feel bad for somebody, or you want them, or you want to cheer for one, and you just want all of them to die, then you lost the audience already. So
totally
yeah,
right.
exactly.
Yeah, completely
But
agree with you. So,
yeah. Um,
so
and you already mentioned this kind of. So let's see if you can elaborate more of it. And I know everybody has asked about it and mentioned it, whether they reviewed it or not. That's actually one reason why I haven't reviewed this film yet, even last year, is because when I first watched this uh, back in October, I was just like taking it all in, like, what the hell did I just watch? Like, is this what's going on here? How is this? Like, you and me talked about it and stuff.
right.
But
Right.
so just to see if I could like at least get some ideas of what's going on. But I didn't
No,
fully
that's
go
great.
into it. Yeah.
And I appreciate that. I mean, this is, I know that it can definitely frustrate people, a movie like this, because, look, this is, part of the thing is that, like, we wanted to be, I thought it would be very interesting that you have a movie about people trying to solve puzzles and people trying to, piece the clues together. And I thought, in a movie like that, you've got to have clues and puzzles in the film itself that the audience themselves can, that you lay out these things, and the answers are there and they exist, and and I promise, like, it's not like just there to drive you crazy. It's there because there are answers to these things, but that they're laid out in a way where you sort of have to try to piece things together. And at the same time, there's elements of it that are like, it doesn't, whether or not you fully get the answer doesn't make a difference to the overall story, like to understand the story. So you don't need to know the answer to understand what's happening in the film or the story itself. But if you want to dive deeper, if you want to go back and watch it and really get into the clues that are laid out and the puzzles that are laid out in the film itself and start to piece it together and figure these things out, that we're not going to, hold your hand through it and treat everybody like children and just like, I have a lot of faith in horror fans and science fiction fans and genre fans in general to really be able to figure these things out, and not need, those scenes where you're sitting there like over explaining every detail of something. Because at the end of the day, like, how many movies have you watched where, yeah, there might be an answer to something and somebody's sitting there and very unnaturally laying out what the answers are, and the answer or the question itself doesn't really matter to what you're watching, and it just takes you out of the film because it's not how people talk. It's not what's actually, it's like, and they're treating you like an idiot, and so there's elements like that in movies like that. And I was well aware that some people be frustrated, especially with trying to figure out what's happening at the end or this or that. I personally don't think it's too confusing, but at the same time, to me, if you don't like it, the answers are like, if you're close but not exact, it's not going to hurt your experience of what you're seeing in the film. Like, the immediate dangers and threats are always there, and what you're seeing, it's not like that. It's not like, oh, I don't understand who's that guy, or why does he want, like it's not that kind of thing that you have to understand. It's really trying to get a sense of, like, you're trying to put your finger on the supernatural elements or puzzle elements of the house itself and how it operates and how it functions. And so whether or not you get it, it's not really the end of, like, because if you don't get it, it's just like, well, okay, you can sit there and go, it's paranormal. Like, this house is not of this world. Like, this house functions in a space not of this world. This house sort of functions beyond this world. This house functions like it's sort of this gateway and sort of this, sort of this middle zone between one world and the next, right? So things can happen that you may never be able to wrap your mind around, because it's just that I personally have answers for everything, but it's not going to ruin the movie if you don't get it. Do you know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
No, I completely understand what you're saying. Yeah, I mean, we don't want everything to be explained. I mean, we want film to tell us a little bit, but we also want to use our own imagination to do the rest.
Right. Exactly. And so the motivations are there. Everything, like, I could answer any question about it, and some I might, and some I might not, in case it's something that I think would hurt somebody else's experience of trying to figure it out themselves. But in private, I could tell you the answer to everything, including see, I'm always interested in what people think. And I always find it interesting, how people sort of judge things. And sometimes I think, people tend to forget that they know that they're watching a horror movie, but the characters don't. So there's always this idea that I've always found sometimes that, like, no matter what you do, no matter how perfectly sound your logic is, and no matter how much you've worked through the ideas with the people playing the characters and their thought process and why they're doing something, there's always somebody who's like, well, that's stupid. You shouldn't go down this way towards that or do this or that because you're in a horror movie and you should know that you're in a horror movie. That makes you dumb if you do it. But that's a very flawed argument because, your character doesn't know. Again, obviously you don't know what you do in these sort of crises. People have been in, crazy situations, especially when you think everything that's happening could be a game and everything that's happening could be like you signed up for this. And even though it looks kind of real and kind of crazy and this looks pretty scary, but you can, how many times when you go to, if you were walking around at, some horror night experience at Universal and you walked into a space that looks super real, you're not going to just suddenly go, I'm in a horror movie and there's a real killer trying to kill me. You would very likely, it's scary and as realistic as it might feel, you'd also still have in the back of your head, I paid, however much money to get into this park and everything they're doing is parlor tricks and meant to scare me. And even though I am scared, I also know it's not real. Do you know what I'm saying? So I always find that kind of interesting, but there's answers for everything. There's answers for everything in the film. And it all makes sense, once you start to piece it all together. But again, I can't, I'm always curious to hear how other people feel. I feel like it's been good. Like I've got a lot of great response from people and I've seen a lot of theories and a lot of them are good and great and correct. And some of them, not as much, but it doesn't matter because I like that people are thinking about it, and wondering what the answers are to some of these questions. So I think that's this is a long answer to say, I think that's a great thing. So.
No, that's perfect. But so everybody would mention it, and it's about the steaming tea. And I know you were talking about it. You and I were talking about it. So,
right.
In a way, I'm trying to think without really saying too much here. Too is between the conversation you and I had is this tea and what you're mentioning with this house of this. It's not normal. It's out of the world. It's like its own Ouija board.
Right.
So the tea is almost like a oh God, what do I want to call it? Like in a way, it's like a seance tea where you drink this tea, and then now that you drink this specific tea, now you're gonna be one with the house. Is that what I'm catching on to?
It's similar to that. I mean, if you look into, shamans and ayahuasca and these sort of hallucinogenics, people don't think, in other cultures, they don't think that what you're seeing is hallucinogenic. They don't think that what you're experiencing is just your brain going crazy, although some people might. But they think that what you're doing is opening up your mind and expanding your mind and seeing more clearly, seeing things that are beyond the reach of, seeing. So the idea would be that if there is this tea, it's sort of, like you said, it's kind of like this primer that, and again, part of the idea was, right, and I'm going to just kind of go back to the whole sort of backstory of what this house is, that you have a scientist, right, in the turn of the century. So he's been sort of like an adventurer. Imagine like the kind of guy that goes out and goes to the Amazon and sees different cultures and then goes all throughout the world. And, he's a very wealthy guy, but he wants to do experiments and he's lost his family and he's obsessed with trying. And again, this is all backstory that you don't necessarily need to know. This is just stuff that we've developed and worked through, but he's lost his family. He's obsessed with trying to contact and be able to speak to his family, and he's kind of created this space in order to try to do it. And what he's done is each room and each thing is sort of another way of exploring or doing experiment on whether or not what you're experiencing is actually truly paranormal. Is it really like reaching through to the other side and connecting and giving them a space to connect back? Or is it just like you're hallucinating and you're and your mind is playing tricks on you. And so in order to do that, he sort of created these devices and these and gone through all this research to learn how to in different ways and through different senses try to bridge the gap between this world and the next world. So what you've got is experimenting with, for example, psychotropic drugs of that nature, plants and things that make you see things and that make you experience things or elevate your experience of those things, and trying to understand whether or not is this just my brain is going crazy because I'm on drugs, or am I like actually expanding my mind? And then again, through these devices, he's doing these experiments. He's done these experiments on people, and all through the guise of playing some game that, they think they're coming to some, dinner party or some game. Again, back in the turn of the century, it wouldn't be an escape room. It would be something else. It would be, some kind of dinner theater, some kind of, some other kind of like, evening game or something. And these people come and they unwittingly, they are signing up for experiments. They are signing up to, be a part of, to let this guy experiment on them and figure out, he's kind of fine tuning his ability to connect to the paranormal. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, with the tea itself, that would be his way of experimenting with those types of psychotropic kind of, plants and elements, and with the devices in the room that followed, it was all trying to sort of flip the switch and see, are they going to see something? Is what they're seeing, is it actually real? Is it really paranormal, or is it just a hallucination? Or some idea that I planted in their head and they're now hallucinating. So that's sort of the big backstory for it. But yes, that's what that tea would essentially be. That would be, again, think of each room that they're going through in this space as being a way to sort of experiment with sort of turn of the century forms of spiritualism and paranormal experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, like you're doing these puzzles to pretty much connect to the other side, and they're also reaching out to contact back, pretty much.
Right.
I think is
exactly.
What you're saying.
Exactly right. Right. So you have a room where it's like, this room is meant to heighten the ability to speak with them or hear them, right? And then this room is meant to heighten the ability to see them. The following room might be meant to heighten the ability to, to physically interact with them and have these different kinds of gateways. And you have these different kinds of, experiments and machines. And so that's why you see all those different things. And in his basement, he's got this sort of makeshift mortuary that he's set up to experiment with bodies and do all kinds of horrible stuff that he's doing. So it's a really interesting space, and we put a lot of time and effort into that space. And we had a great art department. We filmed the movie in Canada, in Ottawa, and we had an amazing art department that really, rose to the challenge of everything we needed to do, creating some of these rooms and like we built that, like we've got the library doors the library bookshelves that open up into doorway and passageways and things like that. And, we built that whole like mortuary in the basement. It was a real house in Ottawa, but we built everything on the inside of it. So it was really cool. And, that's a great experience too, just because to be able to dive into, again, you're looking into, like the 1900s, like the Thomas Edison time, the kind of experiments and things that were going on. And there's this guy named Edgar Casey who was, sort of into seance and into paranormal experimentation himself and trying to communicate to the other side as well. And so there's elements of that, sort of peppered in throughout the story. We actually had a whole sort of storyline in the study that they get into that we cut out of the movie just because, not because the scene itself wasn't working. It was just getting too long. But, where they find all this literature on Casey and some of the other turn of the century folk who are doing, paranormal experimentation and things like that. So it's great. It's a lot of fun to have that sort of rich backstory. Obviously, it then leads to a lot of questions because we put in, we'll put in lots of clues and ideas, and it's nice. I mean, one of the nice things is that you see, audience members sometimes see things and they want to know more about it. Obviously, it's not part of the A storyline or what's happening in the immediate, so it's kind of like it becomes more like texture and stuff that happens in the background, but it all has that connectivity, if that makes sense.
No, totally. That totally makes sense. And that, to touch on what you were saying about the room, of how they interact with the room and whether they hear or see them, and as you were talking about with the house owner who built the house per se, like traveled and explored areas, that kind of goes back to the first room, which I believe it was with Tyler. And and all I'm gonna say, so I don't spoil too much of anything, but just to kind of clarify what you were talking about with the whole exploring the room and experimenting with people and stuff, and having the whole, the T, whether are you hallucinating, are you not? Is this really an eye opener, or are you really thinking to yourself you're drugged? But that kind of reminds me of the scene with, like I was trying to say, with Tyler within the first room of the mask room, and that's all I'm gonna say.
Right. No, that's exactly right. And yeah, that room itself is intended to amplify the visions and the and the sightings that you can see in that space, right? And then the next room, you've got sort of that radio and the telephone, and that's that space. That's
the communication way.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And kind of speak through and amplify that space. That's why you also have that like device where you can touch something and then it sort of it kind of comes right back. That's all part of that device where she's putting her hand on it. That's not her hand that's coming back. You know what I mean? When you see that.
Exactly.
So,
exactly.
Things like that. And then up in the room with the projector, in that sort of attic looking space, you've got all these sort of gateway doors, and that fabric is sort of that's around is not just like randomly laid around there. It's actually there to amplify the ability for physically reaching through, right? So if you can reach through this fabric and they can see your hand, they can't necessarily see your body, but it happens the other way too, that they can sort of reach back, and that you've got these sort of gateway, if you see those kind of door frames everywhere, and sort of all the other elements of the house are kind of tied together. When you see that space, you can kind of see, you can see the clockwork, and you can see the gears, and you can see, just lots of elements of like the masks. You can see masks on the wall in the background if you look closely, and some of these other, you can sort of see all these different things that are tied in throughout the entire house, which is kind of cool if you pay attention. So
yeah, I want to say I paid attention enough, but I mean definitely.
it's really, it's a lot of stuff, so I understand why it's hard to miss it.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Watching it a second time actually helped a lot, because even though I remembered some of the parts of the movie, but then this time I'm just like, okay, now I'm catching on to this. And, it helps. It helps. That's the problem with some horror fans too. They watch a movie once and that's how they judge it, instead of going back the second time and really paying it. Well, what do they call it? They say the first time is like entertainment. The second time is to like, look for things that you didn't maybe spot the first time. Right,
so, it's true. And it's funny, I totally agree with that. I find sometimes that movies that I tend to like the most, I might not like as much the first time I watch it, because it's not made just to sit back and for that entertainment purpose. It's kind of made for more things than that. And so you watch it the first time and you're kind of confused by certain things and your experiences, like whatever. And then you watch it again, you start to see new things. You start to get excited about it. And you start to see some of the craftsmanship and the ideas that are behind it, which you might have missed the first time around. And then a lot of times there are movies where you think you like it a lot the first time you watch it, and you go back and watch it again, and you're like, that's all it was. It was just there wasn't much more to it than what was there. And it's kind of like, it's fun to sort of see the difference in that. And I definitely feel like this movie was, it was designed to have, again, I certainly don't want people not to enjoy watching it the first time. I just think that there's a lot more you'll catch if you watch it more than once.
No, exactly.
So you have that
replayability. Yes, exactly. And and speaking of like the different type of rooms and experiments and stuff. So touching on that is, how did you guys think of the concept for these, like, lack of better word, in like the riddle games? Because it almost seems like a riddle, because like, especially in the first room, you had to listen to the record player in order to really understand the first room, per se.
Right. Yeah. Well, we did a lot of research, and we kind of started to analyze. We wanted it to be something that would play in two different ways, right? So This could play as a puzzle, as just an interesting puzzle with a backstory for an actual escape room, or these also, and at the same time, each thing that has a puzzle, we wanted it also to have this sort of element of having an experimental sort of some action that is part of an experiment, that some part that like learning this thing and doing this thing can be unleashing something, or could let you know that you're hearing something maybe that's not there, so you've actually heard the proper thing, right? Maybe that maybe if you hadn't tried that tea, you wouldn't necessarily hear the same thing that they're hearing when they're, what I'm saying? There's that kind of element to it where it's there, but if they're not connected, again, you can start to see, oh yeah, it's working because they were able to do that. So there's that element of that. See what I'm saying? And so we did a lot of research. We did escape rooms ourselves. And because again, we wanted to play in that world as well. We want to enjoy that. I mean, that's part of the fun of watching a movie like this, is experiencing the escape room. So we did a lot of research, and yeah, I mean, there's some crazy puzzles out there. I mean, we wanted to base everything in some way or another on something that could have happened in one of these spaces that we tried ourselves. And actually the production designer, who is also one of the producers on the film, up in Canada, designs escape rooms, in Canada, which is great, and has done several of them. And so we got to do a lot of practical effects. So there are things that, like, all the things that open, or like the gears that come out of water and things like that, that's all practical effects. And it's really cool to kind of be able to design that stuff and see it come to life in front of your face. So, yeah.
Wow.
I hope that answered it. Does that answer it?
No, yeah, that's I think more than enough. But you're right. If you're gonna make something based on a specific thing, you might as well do it yourself. And on top of that, you might want to research whatever you're trying to focus on too, because researching and doing the event or whatever you're trying to do really does, you experience it. So now you get that idea of, okay, now I can go into it because now I have a better understanding of what an escape room feels like, versus trying to write it and not know a damn thing about it.
Right. No, totally. Yeah, you can't. I believe firmly in researching things that occupy the world of, the movies that I'm making, because I want there to be that authenticity to the material, so that, like, whatever it is, we've done research. We haven't, like, whatever it is that we're working on, there's been a whole lot of research that's gone on into the film, and you know, I never just kind of go into something blindly and go, well, you know, it might not make sense to anybody in the real world, but who cares? It's a movie, and like I just don't, you know, I don't believe in that. I want it to, you know, and one of the great things about doing some of that research is that it opens up doors and ideas that you never even considered before. So I think that's the other part that's great. But you want people who've experienced this kind of thing to be able to see the authenticity in some of that. So.
Agreed. Oh yeah, I 100% agree. And one thing I noticed, like in this film, like your last film with like House of the Witch, is once again the amazing lighting that you guys have done, and I kind of saying that too is because last time when we had you on the show, you promised us the first look into your upcoming project, which at the time we didn't know what the hell you were talking about until you kind of sent us the screenshots and you kind of told us a little bit more. But I just remember seeing these, you know, these unedited pictures or per se, and I just remember seeing the lights in some of these stills where I'm just like, wow, you know, this is just spot on. Like examples would be, look at the lighting that you guys did with the mask room, the very first room, and then the second room, which when I wrote this question down, just to kind of give you an idea of what I'm calling it, it's called the invention room, where like, so
yeah,
that lighting in there. Yeah.
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 Yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. We, you know, obviously I feel this way about any movie in particular, but especially with a horror film. I mean, atmosphere is such an important element of it. And creating that atmosphere and maintaining that atmosphere and basing it in a way where it's like, you want to look, I mean, I appreciate movies that feel very, you know, very organic and natural and real. Right.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I also really, you know, I also love feeling that there's a production value to a film that I'm watching, and that there's some craftsmanship and that there's some design behind, you know, what's happening. And, you know, it's not like we want anything to feel over the top or too, you know, but it's like, it's just kind of like creating the art within the space. You kind of create the atmosphere, and then you know, and you look at the room and you look at the space, and how do you sort of amplify that atmosphere and make, you know, it's just sort of another tool to bring out the experience for the viewer, so that you can, you know, you can experience this film on a more three-dimensional level, on a level that's, you know, that's not just like, yeah, we just picked up a camera and shot it. You know, like it's just adding that sort of craftsmanship, but also like really heavily diving into the atmosphere, because again, that space that you're in the movie, when you're spending this amount of time in it, whatever the place is, you want it to have that extra little bit of something, you know. And for sure, and I really appreciate that you noticed it. And if you look closely, you'll actually notice that there's some very interesting things that happen with color throughout the movie, and especially towards the end. I won't say too much, but when they're sort of coming out of the diner and that whole thing. But it's very subtle, but it's very specific and intended to alter a little bit what you're seeing and what you're thinking about. It's almost like at the very end of the movie, it's actually the most color you see in the movie, in terms of feeling a little brighter, feeling a little less gray, you know, like overcast day kind of feeling. Yeah. It's just a little bit touch more hope, a little more color, and all that's very, very intentional. Like none of that's by mistake. And each room itself, making it feel unique, and so that you can kind of, you know, you can kind of almost feel the air when you're inside of it, and you know from one room to the next how different the space is. You know what I mean? Physically, how different it is. So you kind of feel that with your eyes, and that's again part of the idea. So I'm really glad you picked up on that as well. So thank you for the.
Well, yeah, I mean, Well, one thing kind of, even though House of the Witch was the very first film I've seen of your work, and that's why I reached out to you to begin with, but that's one thing I look at. I mean, look at like Ridley Scott for an example. Look at the world that he has created for his movies, and
Right.
you look at all that, you look at all the lighting, you look at everything, and then that's usually like all the cool things that people kind of forget to
Right.
really shine on, or do I want to say shine on, or really should I say like they should notice when watching a film? Because kind of like that one other scene where, or two other scenes where like you know Karen is walking around that main hallway that we first saw when they first came in, and you
Right.
got the lights coming in, and then you
Right.
got I believe it was Michael who noticed like the light that was coming through the keyhole from the door.
Right.
Like all that
Totally.
stuff is just like, it's amazing. And you
And
you gotta appreciate that too, because like you're saying, like like the colors are different throughout the film, and it's almost like the same, like how do I want to word it? It's like saying, okay, so you see the light coming through like the window or the door hole, the keyhole, and that's almost a way of saying, okay, this might be a little grungy looking, but there is still a real world out there, if that makes
right.
sense.
Exactly. No, 100%. That's exactly right. I always think that brings this element of what's beyond the wall and what you're not able to get to, and what's that sort of like, it's like dangling that that hope um, and that desire to get past those walls back to that light. It almost reaches out to you, and I'm glad you recognize that. And um, film is obviously such a visual thing. I think a movie like this is so important. One of the things also, is the sound itself. Like, so the soundscape of a movie, especially a movie like this, is super, super important, but you can't forget about, about the visuals and about that space, because you can make up a lot of ground with sound, in any film that you're doing, but people still got to watch it, and it still has to have that visual texture and sort of, that appeal in a way, even if you're watching something that's grungy or like when they're downstairs and that, like in that old school like mortuary, it's like it still has this visual appeal, I think, and that's the idea of it, with the colors and the sort of like, you can kind of feel the air, because you see the light coming in feels a little warmer from the window, but the room itself is green and cold, and you can kind of feel the cold air, how the light from the window hits the cold air and what it does when it hits it. So, and kind of goes from this like sort of warmer, orangish sort of hue coming from the window into this sort of bluish green cold space, and you feel that sort of atmosphere. But yeah, so I thought that's just an important thing to me whenever I go into any film. It's like every element is so important. I mean, I care about the music, I care about the sound, I care about the visuals, I care about the acting, in the film, and those story elements. So it's just putting all that stuff together. It's just, it's like, how do you approach each thing to kind of bring it all together and make this more enriched experience for the viewer. So thank you for that comment. Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, I think that's one thing that really sticks out in the movie is the lighting. Seriously, I mean,
That's
I
great.
mean, there's not one. Well, I guess the invention room is good lighting, but I guess with the way lighting is coming out, I guess you could say the invention room is probably the weakest one, really, when it comes to the light coming in versus
Mm-hmm.
the light that is lighting up the room per se, which
That's true.
makes
Yeah.
yeah.
But
And
that room itself is meant to feel, the most enclosed
oh
and
yeah,
have like
exactly.
and it has like, you know, all this like candlelight. So everything in that room is like lit. That's why it has all these like, you know, sort of warm things coming from this candle space, you know. And I think that's such a you feel more enclosed, you know, you feel more trapped, and that's the idea of not having, you know, the sort of beams and outside light sort of escaping or entering the room. So, and then the other cool thing, again, kind of going back to what I just said, is if you I don't know, maybe it's hard to tell. Sometimes it depends on the speaker or how loud you're listening, but put a lot of work into the sound as well. And you'll constantly hear things that are not necessarily on camera or that are happening behind the walls. And you hear the house shifting around, you hear it changing, you hear, like when someone's about to go through a door, you might hear some of the gears moving. And like I said, you get glimpses of this sort of clockwork between the walls and throughout the house, but you also hear it a lot. So when you're in that sort of when you're
environment,
yeah, you really kind of feel transported there. It really depends on, you know, again, your speaker system or how you're listening to it or whatever it is, but it's very much there. It's like you can just sort of hear these things shifting and changing, and you don't really it's sort of suggested that like the house around you is transforming constantly. It's almost alive with this clockwork machinery that's constantly, you know, you get a glimpse of it in the very beginning, you get glimpses of it throughout the film, but it's like all this, like if you peel back the layers behind the walls of this house, you're going to see a very intricate and old-fashioned machine that, again, is all part of this like transformative experience for the person inside that space, and again, all with the intention of amplifying that connection to the other world.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I don't know what else I can really say to that. I mean, that's spot on. And as you're mentioning gears, we notice, or like every time a specific thing would happen, whether it was a certain door or the clock in the invention room, we got to see the nice gear machine in action, really. So Alex, what type of challenges, if there were any challenges, or that came when filming or creating those scenes for the gear scenes?
Well, there were challenges for sure. I mean, you always have to think in advance. Some of the gears were practical, and some of them were like
CGI.
CGI amplified and effects later. And what you do is it's really about kind of, you have to design all of it for, you know, again, it all has to fit together. Like the practical and the CGI all have to kind of be of the same world and match. And you don't want to do anything in the practical world that's going to limit you in the CGI world. And you have to kind of have the foresight to be like, all right, well, the camera's going to go into the wall here and create this thing and and you'll see the gears turning there, and it's going to release this little device, and then you're going to come out here and see it coming out into the, you know, like in the clock or through the walls. Or like, again, the one that we did with the Lady in Water, that was like this giant, like that was the biggest gear that we had. It's a giant hydraulic gear that went into the water, and they had to design that. So, you know, I mean, imagine you're creating this thing that has to sort of, you know, spin underwater and just sort of crest the water and sort of look like a, you know, like spin, just breaking the surface, and all that's, you know, that's machinery. That's actual real like hydraulic stuff that you might see at, like, I don't know, if you go to Disney World or something, you're going to see, like, you know, in the water, there's all these things that kind of pop up out of the water, but that's a challenge, obviously, and that's, you know, to do all that while you're filming, it's, you know, it's never easy. We had chains moving and all this stuff happening. All that stuff was practical.
Wow.
So yeah, that itself is really, you know, a complex sort of, you know, like orchestration of different crew members and things happening all at the same time. But we had such a great crew. and such a great, team art department that like they totally rose to the challenge. So it's great. I mean, for me, it's amazing when you write something into a film with an idea and you actually get to physically see it come to life. Not like, okay, when the CGI is done, we'll get to see it. But no, when you actually are on set and you can see it happening and these things, it's just such a cool. I mean, I can't even.
Yeah, exactly. There's no
explain how
word.
cool that is, but yeah, exactly. So
yeah, exactly. And I think that's probably one of the cool things about No Escape Room is those gear scenes, because of how awesome looking they are, especially like you're calling the lady in the water, and you just, I mean, I you got to appreciate it. I mean, and especially hearing practical effects, that's just amazing. Like, and nowadays it just seems like practical effects is becoming less per se.
yeah,
Depends on the and it depends on the film. I will at least say that, because it really depends on what the film is. Because sometimes practical effects does not do justice for a certain scene. Like, I know
right,
somebody was talking about in the new Predator movie, they were trying to make it practical, but since that specific type of camera work and everything else was not going to work with a practical suit, that would be the only time they would have to go in and actually use CGI, which I can understand
right.
that. If it become too difficult to film, then I guess CGI is going to have to be the only solution to make that scene come to life.
Right. Yeah, I agree with that. And, again, I mean, nothing against CGI. I just think what happens is
There's
CGI is
too much
sort
of
of
it.
like, yeah, it's too much of it. It's sort of like the icing on the cake, but people start making the cake with the icing itself, and then there's no cake left. It's like
Exactly.
they start to just like rely on it so heavily, and it's like when the CGI shot is done, you shouldn't really be able to tell that it's CGI. But how often can you? You can. It's like so many times. It's like, well, you couldn't have shot that shot at all with the camera doing this or that or things like. It should always be made to look real on some level and trick your eye into seeing something that's extraordinary. And I think that's my philosophy on it. Obviously, different people and different tastes and different styles of filmmaking. But I personally think CGI should be the icing on the cake, and it shouldn't be there to completely
to take you away from it. Yeah.
right, or to
Yeah.
completely lean on. You shouldn't be taken out of the movie and going, oh, CGI, that's CGI. It's like you should be able to watch the whole thing together and love this beautiful blend of every element of the film working perfectly and none of it sticking out and calling attention to itself. So yeah, that's just such a, it's a privilege to be able to do it, and obviously it's important to do it whenever you're able to do it. And I personally think, like, what's cool to me using CGI is like the things that you could just that are very mundane, or that are very, like, I don't know, in terms of certain like camera shots, or if you look back to like Fight Club, where it's like the CGI in that movie is like CGI, even though it's very early CGI, and certainly dated by today's standards, there's still something really cool about a camera that flies through, like, even though that this isn't a real camera, this is, this has to be super exceptional camera work, but it's like flying through a garbage can around garbage. That's not like anything, but it makes it, like, just creates a super extended, look into the world. And that's when the style works for, that's when it's like this completely alternate thing. But when it's like if you're doing a movie about dinosaurs or monsters, and the CGI is like, again, the camera's doing all this. Like, I personally think in a situation like that, yeah, you have to do the dinosaur. Maybe you have to do the dinosaur CGI or most of it CGI, right? But your camera work shouldn't look like it should look like you shot that. It should look like it was physically shot, and that's what's going to make it look really amazing. Not when the camera itself is also flying through the trees and doing all, and like, you're like, okay, well, there's no part of the shot that anybody could, even if you had a real dinosaur running through the woods, you couldn't shoot the shot that's flying underneath. That's like, nobody could shoot that. Nobody could film what you're filming right now. So it looks fake. It already looks fake because they're breaking this sort of physical the practicality of how you would be able to do that. But when you go back to something like Steven Spielberg, when he made Jurassic Park, that still stands up as some of the best and that was in 1993, and that still stands up as some of the best CGI work, because he wasn't, there was this element of like, with the CGI itself, the camera still looks like you could have filmed it. You know what I mean? It looks like you could have filmed, the camera was placed here and the camera was placed there, and there's some technique to the way that they're doing it where, then you look at Jurassic World and the camera's like, it's like flying through the trees and and it's like, that doesn't look real at all. It looks like a video game. You're watching a video game, even though the technology itself is so much better, and it's so much more, like it's like the texture on the dinosaur, all this stuff looks better, but the way they're treating it is worse. So it's weird. It's weird to me when people don't fully grasp that. I think that's one of the things that some of the other, sometimes you see that in filmmaking and you're like, sometimes people get it. Like the camera work looks real, and even though that's Godzilla or something, but it's like, that's good. But if it's, if it's something that definitely could never get done, that's, I just always find that problematic. But
oh yeah, yeah. I mean, it's kind of like those old TV show where we walk with the dinosaurs or whatever, and
right.
they show us the real bone, but then they turn the show into like a CGI or animation thing to show us that specific scene or how that specific dinosaur moves and acts, and especially how they defend themselves or attack the prey, depending on whatever it is. But yeah, that's the only time you should actually do it, or
Right.
per se.
Totally.
Yes.
Totally. Yeah, totally agree.
And to touch on what you were talking about earlier about the location of the house that you were talking about. So this one is, how did finding this specific location come by, and especially looking around to find that one house that make you go, this is the one?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question, because when we knew we were going to film in Canada. The company is making with, they had already we weighed the best production places for this particular project and the teams that would be involved. And we really liked, what was coming together through this company out there. So once we got out there, originally the plan was, we would just use a house for the exterior, and we were going to build everything on a stage. And that can be fun, but it also, there's texture that you can't get on a stage, no matter what your budget is. I can almost always spot a sound stage in a movie. Sometimes there's some really great stages and great work that goes into it, but you get to put your resources into other things. We walked into that house, and starting to look around again. It wasn't even like the producer who was taking us there, because we were location scouting various houses. They didn't even think that this was at the top of the list of houses we might end up using. But as soon as we walked into it and we started to look around and see, sort of the bones of the space and what we could do with it, and a plan started to come together. And I was kind of walking around the house with the production designer, and I mean, it looked amazing from the moment we walked in there. And actually, that particular house had kind of a creepy backstory to it, because the original owner of that house had been killed there. And there was sort of a weird vibe with that. But outside of that, I mean, it had this really old, beautiful old turn of the century feel to it. It had this feel of like, this sort of Victorian era house. It looked amazing on the outside, but the inside still felt like you could feel that time frame, in the space. There were some modern parts of the house that we didn't use or film, but as we walked around it, we were like, okay, so this would be, the landing space, and this would be sort of the tea room, and then this would be like the mask room over here, and we would build this, and this, and we would build these walls here. And actually, we used one room as two different spaces. We just built different walls inside of it, so that So the wall, part of the reason why that room also feels so enclosed and dark is that actual the room that you're calling the invention room.
Right.
That room is actually the same space as the land. It's like sort of like the landing room when they first walk in. That original hallway where all that light's coming through. Believe it or not, that's the exact same room. And we just built walls and wallpapered the walls and painted it and did all that stuff inside of that space to be able to use that room for two different parts of the house. But it's really great to actually have a physical space like that and walk around to the various parts of your set, and feel like you're fully engrossed in this atmosphere. And like I remember when people would see in the basement when we created that mortuary, it's like when people would see that, they would get so freaked. It was like such a cool looking space. And then that actual stream that we filmed in was really outside of the house. And actually that whole lady in water scene, when we first scouted the house, wasn't even in the script. And it was part of some ideas that we had already been kind of kicking around. But once we saw this, the stream and how everything was going to work out, then we sort of put it all together and put the scene together specifically to kind of fit with the real place that we were filming in. So that's one of the ways in which it can actually alter or enrich the film, because that's one of my favorite scenes in the movie, and it wasn't even in the original script. And we sort of started to think about how we could expand some of the machinery and clockwork of this house and see how it's sort of it's spread out so far that it's like you can't even tell how far out this goes and whether or not you could ever get off this space. You know what I mean? Outside of this house, like you could even when you're outside of the walls of the house, you're still sort of trapped in this place. So
I want that just you don't ever want to leave. Dun, dun, dun.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's really funny that you started talking about that scene, because one of the things that's also going on with that lady in the water is that weird sort of twist time method thing, which is like that the lady in the water scene where
right.
Not to say too much either, but I know it's also in the trailer, so I'm trying to keep it to like the trailer of what we see to versus not saying too much. And
Right.
I guess the way I'm trying to figure out to word this is, so we see Michael upstairs and he notices there's like muddy tracks, and he goes up, and that's where the lady in the water scene comes into play. And then
right.
After that we get that other thing that happens, which is all I'm gonna say. So I guess what this question
right.
is, can you at least give us a little idea of this weird reversing time method thing that's going on? It seems, because
totally,
like I said,
totally.
Yeah.
No, that's a good way of not spoiling too much and sort of putting out there. Yeah, we wanted to have obviously this idea of, again, you're in this sort of space outside the norm of what's, I guess you would call it paranormal, right? Because it's not normal. So you're in a space now that is conducting and doing and allowing you to reach back in time and reach back. So again, once you're dead, right? If
Right.
someone's dead and they're going to communicate with the past, they have to be able to reach back in. It's not like someone current, like you have to be able to, you have to be able to, time in that realm. Again, not that we know for a fact, but very likely doesn't exist in the way that we understand it, right? And so
Right.
The idea would be that you're playing with this sort of interdimensional elements where you can communicate with people that have been dead for a long time, or that that roam these halls in the 80 years ago, or maybe when you die, you can be communicating with yourself in the past. So there's these ideas of actual like looping and echoes, and we kind of wanted to separate what that meant. Like there's this looping where there's sort of interactivity with, like you can interact with yourself in a different time, and you're like, because you're in this weird conductor of that's messing with time and space and all these other things. Like it's this very odd physical space that's creating these very weird side effects to some of these experiments that are happening and some of these gateways and things like that. So what it is this sort of interconnected like looping where you are actually setting off a series of events that end up affecting you. Like your later self might interact with your previous self and set off a series of events that almost suggests that this is always, you're almost caught in this like constant loop of, in this sort of constant recycling of things, because you like his own tracks. I don't want to, again, I guess this would be me saying spoilers again if you haven't watched it, but your own tracks are leading you to something that you haven't even created them yet, but that sets in motion. Like you're creating the tracks that you're eventually going to find, and it's like this loop that's going to keep happening. It's the same thing that happens like when Melanie is talking to herself earlier in the film, through that they're hearing that voice, and it's her own voice, and the voice tells Tyler to run because she's just seen something that horrifies her later in the film, and in trying to save him, she's actually setting in motion the series of events that end up that lead towards the danger that she's trying to save him from. And it's this weird, again, it's like that thing where like even if you could go back in time and try to affect yourself, you're still going to end up in this, like if you time travel back, you are actually affecting something that was always going to be the way it was anyway, so that you were always going to return and affect yourself. Do you see what I'm saying? Like it was always just sort of like folding back on time and space. And so that's some of the elements that we wanted to play with, again, because once you start to get into that space of, interdimensional and paranormal activity where you're crossing over, it's like, what are the effects of that? What are the physical effects of that? And how does time and space bend now in that sort of world? And so those are the ideas that we were playing with, without trying to get, too specific, without ruining anything. You're in a space that is meant for basically turning off the way you experience time in places, and that's why you have all these clocks around and all these like old-fashioned kind of things like that. And again, the gears and the clockwork. It's like it's turning off. Again, we experience time in a very linear fashion, but if you were to remove that and or take away the experience of that, again, it's like these experiences that cross each other and interact with each other and fold back on each other and perpetuate certain things. In some ways, it becomes somewhat like some kind of purgatory or
a residual haunting.
Exactly, because you get caught in a loop, and you get caught in these sort of like these sort of like things that will just constantly be looping back on themselves. So that's the idea behind it.
That's cool. So, Alex, before I give you these last two questions, is there anything that I have not touched on that you feel like we should know about, or do you feel like we pretty much once again covered it all up to this point?
I think we have. It's hard for me, I'm sure I'll think of things. So I'm like, I should have told you about this or that, because there's so much. Obviously, whenever you get into anything like this, it's like it's months and months and months, maybe almost a year of experience, and it's all like it's hard to summarize all that stuff in
one sentence. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
But I think you've done a pretty thorough and good job of kind of covering the bases on those things.
Well, thank you. So I guess now with No Escape Room that got premiered back on October 6th of 2018. So that was the Sci-Fi's 31 Days of Halloween. Now, I know with like House of the Witch came out on DVD. Is there any plan for No Escape Room to get its own release, or is it kind of like a sci-fi exclusive?
Oh no, yeah, it is. It is getting some release. I think it's already been released on iTunes, so it can be purchased on iTunes and I think Amazon Prime and some of those venues like that. So I know that it's available there. I don't know if the physical DVD is being released or not. I think it is, but I'm pretty sure. Actually, I am sure that it was released on iTunes at the end of last year after it premiered at some point on Sci-Fi. So it is available to be watched or downloaded through that.
Sweet, can't wait.
Yeah.
And so Alex, here's your final question. And once again, before I give it to you, once again, thank you so much for your time. It's an honor to have you back on, and you've pretty much have so much information to tell that I'm just sitting here going, like, Jesus, like there's a lot of information here. So I can't wait to actually go back and re-listen to really absorb more of what you said, to really get a better understanding of this movie. Like, I got a better understanding now, but I feel like as I go back and listen to this once it is up, which hopefully it's soon. Like I mentioned earlier, we got as we're recording this is 1 out of 3 episodes that are being recorded today on January 12th, just to throw it out there. And it's just great to be able to interact with someone like you who is willing to share information and not really give it all up front, but you give explanations of, well, maybe if you look at it like this, maybe if we look at this specific film and then think of this, like you have a great way of telling. This is going to sound weird, but I don't really know anything else to really mention it, but it's almost like you're telling a story, and that story is coming to life as we're talking, if that makes sense.
That's awesome. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. It does make sense, and I appreciate that's a nice compliment, and I definitely, again, my hope is to help enrich anybody who's listening, their experience of that they can bring to watching it or rewatching the movie, or just having that extra bit of
information to help you. Yeah,
totally.
Yeah. So
thank you.
No, you're very welcome. And for your last question is, so what can we see from you in 2019?
I've got a couple of very fun projects coming up. One of them is in the sort of thriller, sort of I hesitate to say slasher space because it's not really, but it's in the world. I'll say that it's going to be different, but it's should be pretty fun. And then I've got another one that's towards the end of the year that I'm very excited about. There's actually a whole slate of projects. So I'm just sort of highlighting 2 of them. But that one is a bigger film that I'm really excited about, and it's I guess what I would say about that is, because I don't want to say too much yet, I'm not really supposed to, but it's another take on a genre that I think people are pretty familiar with the genre, but this is a whole new look at it, and a different sort of approach to it that's going to be really, really cool experience to see a movie like this set in an era and genre that people know really well, but told in a different way and from a unique sort of perspective and intimate sort of telling of it. So I think it'll be really fun, and I definitely know you'll enjoy that movie as well. I'll just say that. But I'll definitely keep you in the loop about it. And
yes, please. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's kind of funny that you say that. You're the second person that says something like that, and I'm gonna give a shout out to Bill Oberst Jr. for a minute, because back in 2017 when we first interviewed him, he was talking to us about a movie he had done where he played like a necrophiliac weird clown in Circus of the Dead. And near the end of the episode of just talking to us, and he mentioned in Circus of Dead maybe 3 or 4 times, but at one specific time he just goes, "You know what? I'm gonna say it again. Circus of the Dead. I can already tell you and Tessa are gonna love Circus of the Dead."
That's
So
awesome.
and you know what? He was 100% right. Me and Tessa went into the movie, and at the end of the movie, we're just like, "Oh my god, this was amazing!" so
That's awesome. That's
so
awesome.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I can't wait.
Well,
And
great. I
that
can't wait to share it with you.
yeah,
So,
and and I'll say it again, Alex, and you probably already know this anyway, but for those listening too, like, you're always welcome back onto the show anytime, even if you just want to come hang out with us and give your own opinions about certain movies that we may be talking about. Just to have like somebody like yourself to put in maybe like a more professional storytelling detail of an opinion, because it's always cool to get other people's opinions. And if there's ever anything that we may be going to be recording in the near future that you're just like, "Oh man, I love this movie so much, can I come on and chat with you guys for it?" Just give us a shout. We'll gladly put you on, and we'll have a good fun old time. Like, we got a lot of episodes that after this I'll send you a, a an idea of what to come for this podcast in 2019 myself. And for those listening, we got quite a few anniversaries this year for some interesting films. Especially, I'm going to say one right now, because just to kind of give you an idea. But in June, I believe, there's going to be 2 films. One I'm really shocked on of how old it is. I don't know. I think it was because of me listening to an older episode and I heard the name of the film, and then for some weird reason, I just wanted to look it up. And then I did my math. And then I find out this film is going to be having its 90th anniversary in June. And that
whoa.
is the silent black and white film Nosferatu. So you bet
Oh,
your
awesome.
sweet, so you bet your sweet butt that we will be doing a 90th anniversary episode for Nosferatu.
That that's awesome. That's really awesome. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah,
thank you so much for the invite. I absolutely would love to take you up on that sometime. I always enjoy talking to you, and I appreciate the time and the interest in the stuff that I'm doing, and certainly always interested in stuff other people are doing. So
definitely.
that's really great. Yeah. So
Definitely.
thank you.
And one last thing, Alex, before we end this, is if people want to find you to keep in touch of your upcoming project, to learn of what really coming out with you and what you're working on, where can people find you?
They can always obviously find me on the social media stuff. I don't really post anything unless I'm actually unless I'm working. So I don't like to, oversaturate stuff out there. But I'm on Instagram. It's Alex_Merkin, and on Twitter it's just at Alex Merkin. So those are two ways. I think Instagram I'm probably a little more active on when I'm working. So that would certainly be a way to see what's happening. Or when I'm on set, I like to, I tend to post little things from set, or just keep people kind of intrigued about stuff that's going on. And outside of that, it's just always a matter of like kind of staying in touch with people who are interested in the work. And I think that's probably the best way to find me. So yeah.
Well, there you go, guys. And once again, thank you, Alex, for your time. And It just was like a pretty amazing conversation already, and I hope I didn't step on too many boundaries. I tried to do my best.
No, you did great. You did great. Absolutely, I appreciate it. Thank you so much for having me. And yeah, I'm always happy to give you guys exclusives and come back. So appreciate it. And
well, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much.
Great.
And for those listening, as always, like we always end any type of episode, and just hopefully you keep up with us too. And as always, stay scary, everyone.
Stay scary.